all over the world, people are using forward-facing sonar, A-rigs in the winter, and small single swim baits, and just live scoping them in the middle of the water column, you know, whether that fish is floating in 9 foot of water over 40 or 20 foot of water over 40. You know, that's just how these big fish are getting caught. Pretty much every one of these shad lunkers getting brought in is doing that or jerk baiting. So that's just the easiest thing to talk about. Let's go on to spring. All right, let's start on the top. We've already talked about the 6 cents dogma. So when you go into the spring, your fish are gonna start bedding. They're gonna start spawning. Some of your bigger fish, like I talked about already, wanna feed up. Say you get fish that are pre-spawned way back in some bushes. Glade Creek at Lake Fork, if you know anything about it, it's got a bunch of little islands way in the back. When it floods, it gets in the bushes, just like Toledo Bend, Rayburn, anywhere, Gunnersville. These fish want to get as far into the structure as they can, whether they're actually spawning or they're pre-spawn, just getting back there and sitting there until their male is ready to make a bed and start it. And a lot of times you'll go through there with chatterbait, stuff like that, catch some fish, but I've seen later in the day in the spring, some of the biggest fish you can catch are on a hollow belly frog and a popper, working them slow over a fish's area where they're about to bed or they're actually on a bed. You know, a lot of the big fish that I'm catching on top in the spring are fish on beds, you know, that I can't see, whether you're throwing a popper by a stump in a couple foot of water or just burning down the bank with a buzzbait and getting a fish to come up and react. So just make sure you keep that top water in your hand, whether it's, you know, early in the spring pre-spawn, like I said, throwing a popper or a frog over a bed and bass real slow, or towards the end of spring when you got a shad spawn going on. And that's when I'm gonna pull out more of the dogma, 6 cents dogma, big Zara spook, stuff like that, working it over, you know, shell beds and stuff like that where the fish are actually schooling on shad. And then one of the most underutilized baits in the spring and a lot of other seasons of the year, but we're talking about spring right now, for being on top of the water is a wake bait. You know, there's a couple wake baits out there that I really like, and you know, people don't talk about them a bunch, but there's been a couple national tournaments won on wake baits. You know, I'm not saying they weighed every single fish on them, but a lot of them have. Nick LeBrun, who's done some stuff with the Bass University, I mean, he won the BFL All-American, he won the James River. I'm not saying all these were just on a wake bait, but a couple of them, those two right there, the bait he was throwing was that 6 cents movement 80 wake, you know, around cypress trees and stuff like that, any kind of structure, you know, whether it's a grass line, you know, docks, stuff like that. A wake bait is just I brought some, it's just a hard bait, looks like a crankbait, but the bill design is a little bit different, and you can roll it over the top of wherever these fish are on top of the water, and it's just it's a top water bite. You know, it's pretty explosive. You know, I'm throwing that on a 7.3 medium heavy rod, Halo HFX, high speed reel, and there's kind of two different lines. You can throw it on any line you want really, but when I'm really throwing that, I throw it on 20-pound monofilament, just 20-pound sunline monofilament. You know, you want that bait up in the water column, you don't want that fluorocarbon pulling it down, and it's a treble hook bait. You know, that the stretch of that mono helps me hook those fish and keep them pinned. So that's, you know, just like I did on the pre-spawn deal I told you, man, the swank's kind of a little niche bait that not a lot of people are throwing. Same thing with the wake bait in the spring, whether it's pre-spawn to when they're just getting off the beds eating shad, or I throw it over bluegill beds, a bunch of stuff like that. You know, it's a really good bait that not a lot of people know that gets a really big bite. I usually throw two. I throw a brim color, that one right there, when I'm around cypress trees or bluegill beds. Then I'll throw just a white one when I'm shad spawn or just throwing it in general around grass or anything. That's two colors, brim and shad, one of the two. It's really, really good around brim beds. All right, that's the top of the water column there.